Why are strangers moving furniture into my house? I demanded, my voice trembling with disbelief. Logan, my husband of 25 years, didn't even flinch as he directed the movers to bring in a massive, outdated sofa that wasn't ours. His parents, Robert and Diane, stood nearby, their smug smiles twisting my stomach. "This isn't your house anymore, Amanda," Logan said flatly, his words slashing through the air like a whip. "I've transferred the ownership to my parents. You need to pack your things and leave." The words hit me harder than any blow could. The house I had poured my blood, sweat, and every last penny into, the house that was supposed to represent our shared dreams, had been ripped from under me without warning, and the people who were supposed to be my family stood there, basking in their betrayal. To anyone on the outside, Logan and I had the perfect life. We lived in a cozy suburban home in Denver, Colorado, and had raised a wonderful son who was now thriving in his own career. Logan was charming and at one point attentive. When we first met at a corporate networking event, I was captivated by his easy laughter and self-assured demeanor. I thought I had found a partner, someone who would stand beside me through life's storms. But somewhere along the way, the man I fell in love with morphed into someone unrecognizable. At first it was subtle, comments about how I was too controlling when I meticulously budgeted for our dream home. Then came the verbal jabs disguised as jokes, the way he would dismiss my ideas or decisions, and when he abruptly quit his job without consulting me, leaving me to shoulder the financial burden alone, I knew something was deeply wrong. Still, I clung to the hope that things would improve. I devoted myself to rebuilding our house, pouring my savings and energy into creating the sanctuary we had always talked about. The spacious kitchen with its state-of-the-art appliances, the sunlit living room where we could entertain guests, all of it was my labor of love. I thought that somehow it would bring us closer. The first cracks in our foundation began to show when Logan's parents started visiting more frequently. Robert and Diane had never been particularly warm toward me. Early in our marriage, they made no secret of their disdain, criticizing everything from my background to my decision to pursue a career in handmade crafts. Over time, their interference faded as we saw them less. But when we moved into the newly rebuilt house, they reemerged, this time with an unsettling regularity. At first, I chalked it up to their excitement about the new home, but their comments, thinly veiled insults about my homemaking skills or the money I spent on renovations, began to chip away at my patience. Logan, instead of defending me, seemed to encourage their behavior. He laughed at their remarks and even started blaming me for things I couldn't control. One afternoon, I came home from teaching a workshop to find my in-laws sprawled across my couch, their belongings scattered around like they owned the place. Empty beer bottles lined the coffee table, and the air was heavy with the smell of stale alcohol. "James invited us," Diane said, her tone dripping with entitlement when I asked why they were there. "After all, it's going to be our home soon." Her words stopped me in my tracks. I laughed nervously, thinking it was some twisted joke. But when I looked at Logan, he avoided my gaze. "Logan?" I pressed, my heart pounding. "What does she mean?" His response was dismissive. "Don't worry about it, Amanda. They're just visiting." That night, I barely slept. Something about their behavior gnawed at me, a whisper of betrayal that I couldn't shake. Weeks later, I started noticing small changes. Items would go missing, replaced by outdated furniture that didn't belong to us. The spare bedroom was suddenly packed with Robert and Diane's things, and Logan brushed off my concerns with nonchalant excuses. Then came the day I walked in on them, openly inspecting the house, as though they were appraising it. "What's going on?" I demanded, my voice sharp. Diane shot me a saccharine smile. "Oh, nothing, dear. Just planning for the future." The final straw came when I discovered a moving truck parked in front of our house. As I stepped inside, my worst fears were confirmed. My furniture, my personal belongings, the very things that made the house ours, gone. In their place were Robert and Diane's dated, mismatched items, as if I had been erased from the home entirely. Logan's betrayal was complete when he handed me a stack of papers. "It's done," he said. "The house is legally theirs now, and I think it's time we went our separate ways." I stared at the documents, my vision blurring with tears. My throat tightened, but I refused to break in front of them. They wanted to see me fall apart, to crumble under the weight of their cruelty. Instead, I took a deep breath and looked Logan in the eye. "If you think this is the end, you're mistaken," I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. I packed my bags that night, leaving behind the house that once represented hope and love. But as I walked out the door, I carried something they couldn't see, a plan. They thought they had won, but they had underestimated me. This was far from over. Leaving the house felt like stepping into the void. The place I had poured my soul into now belonged to people who saw me as nothing more than an obstacle. But instead of breaking, I focused on untangling the mess Logan and his family had created. I needed answers, and I needed them fast. I started with a visit to the county records office. Sitting in the cramped, fluorescent-lit space, I flipped through documents on property transfers. My stomach churned as I found the paperwork. Logan had sold the house to his parents weeks before he told me. The documents bore his signature alongside Robert and Diane's. My name was nowhere to be found, despite the fact that I had covered every cent of the down payment and managed the mortgage. I clenched the paper in my hands, fury bubbling inside me. This wasn't just betrayal, it was theft. Determined to understand how deep this treachery went, I checked our shared accounts. My heart sank as I saw a series of withdrawals over the past months, each one just small enough not to trigger my immediate suspicion. Logan had siphoned money from our joint savings, padding his parents' bank account to make the purchase of the house look legitimate. The man I had once trusted with my life had turned into a stranger, someone willing to sabotage his own wife for his selfish gain. The pieces started to fall into place. Diane and Robert's constant visits, their inspections of the house, and Logan's dismissive attitude weren't random. It had all been orchestrated, a calculated plan to strip me of everything I had worked for. What stung the most wasn't the financial loss, but the realization that the man I had loved for decades had been complicit in humiliating me. I knew I couldn't confront them yet. I needed a plan, something solid that would not only expose their deceit, but also ensure they couldn't recover from it. For now, I played the role of the defeated ex-wife, retreating to a small rental on the edge of town. But every night, I pored over bank statements, legal documents, and surveillance footage I had secretly collected. Logan's arrogance was his Achilles heel. He and his parents thought I was too broken to fight back. That overconfidence led them to be careless, and it wasn't long before I uncovered the key to my counterattack. One evening, I sat at my kitchen table, reviewing the surveillance footage from the cameras I had installed in the house. At first, it was the usual scenes: Diane rifling through my pantry, Robert lounging on the couch, and Logan pacing the living room. But then, a conversation caught my attention. "It's perfect," Robert said, holding a glass of whiskey. "She has no idea we've been planning this for months." Logan laughed, a sound that sent a shiver down my spine. Amanda always thought she was so smart. She didn't even notice when I started pulling money out of the account. "And now the house is ours." "It's about time we got something out of this," Diane chimed in. "She's been acting like she's better than us ever since you married her." Their words stung, but they also fueled my determination. I saved the clip, knowing it would be invaluable later. With evidence in hand, I turned to a trusted friend, Sarah, a paralegal I had known since college. Over coffee, I laid out everything I had uncovered. Sarah's eyes widened as I recounted the betrayal and showed her the footage. "This is serious, Amanda," she said, her voice low. "You have grounds to take legal action, but it won't be easy. They've covered their tracks just enough to make it a fight." "I don't care," I replied. "I'll fight until they have nothing left." Sarah nodded, her expression hardening. "Then let's get to work." Over the next few weeks, Sarah and I built a case. We documented every financial transaction, every instance of deceit, and every piece of evidence that showed Logan and his parents' intentions. Meanwhile, I kept my distance, refusing to respond to Logan's sporadic attempts to contact me. When he finally did reach out, it was to gloat. "Hope you're settling into your new life," he sneered over the phone. "Don't worry about the house. It's in good hands now." I bit back a retort, letting him think he had the upper hand. "I'm managing," I said, my tone neutral. "I just want to move on." "Good," he replied, clearly satisfied. "Maybe now you'll learn not to bite off more than you can chew." His arrogance only strengthened my resolve. By the time we were ready to confront him, I felt like I had regained a piece of myself. Logan and his parents had underestimated me, and it was time to show them just how big of a mistake that was. When the legal notice arrived at their doorstep, I imagined their smug smiles fading. The lawsuit was airtight, thanks to Sarah's meticulous work. Not only was I suing for the money Logan had stolen, but I was also demanding compensation for the house and the emotional distress they had caused. The first court hearing was a spectacle. Logan walked in with his parents, their expressions a mix of defiance and nervousness. When I presented the surveillance footage, the courtroom fell silent. Logan's smirk faltered as his own words echoed through the room. "She has no idea we've been planning this for months." It was a moment of vindication, but the fight wasn't over yet. They tried to argue, to paint me as the bitter ex-wife trying to ruin their lives. But the evidence was undeniable. As I left the courthouse that day, I felt lighter than I had in months. The battle was far from over, but for the first time, I felt like I had control over my life again. Logan and his family thought they had buried me, but they had only planted the seeds for my comeback. This wasn't the end. This was just the beginning of reclaiming everything they had stolen. The day of the hearing loomed closer, but Logan remained unbothered, living as though he were untouchable. His parents paraded around town, boasting about their newfound home and wealth as if it were their birthright. Meanwhile, I focused on preparing for the inevitable showdown. But life has a way of revealing truths in the most unexpected ways. One chilly autumn morning, as I sat in my small rental, sipping coffee and reviewing more documents with Sarah, my phone buzzed with an email notification. It was from a mutual acquaintance, someone Logan and I had met years ago at a charity event. I hesitated before opening it, unsure what to expect. The email's subject line read, "You need to see this." Attached were photos and a series of text exchanges between Logan and a real estate developer I didn't recognize. The content was damning. Logan hadn't just sold the house to his parents. He had been negotiating with this developer to flip the property for a profit, without their knowledge. The final text from the developer confirmed everything. "Let me know when the property clears with your parents. We'll finalize the deal then." My stomach churned as I pieced together the betrayal. Logan had used his parents as pawns in his larger scheme to profit from my hard work and sacrifices. Not only had he stolen my dream, but he was also poised to betray the very people who had aided him in his deceit. That evening, I decided it was time to confront him. Armed with the new evidence, I arrived unannounced at the house that once felt like home. The sight of my in-laws' gaudy furniture filling the space made my stomach turn, but I kept my composure. Logan was in the kitchen, sipping whiskey like a king in his stolen castle. Diane and Robert sat in the living room, laughing over some television show. The contrast between their jovial demeanor and the storm brewing inside me was almost too much to bear. "Surprise!" I announced, my voice echoing through the house. Logan turned, his expression shifting from smugness to irritation. "What are you doing here, Amanda? You're not welcome." "Funny, I was just about to say the same thing to you," I replied, stepping into the room. "But don't worry, I won't stay long. I just wanted to deliver something." I placed a folder on the kitchen counter, watching as Logan eyed it warily. "What's this?" he asked, his tone laced with suspicion. "Proof," I said simply. "Proof that your little scheme is about to implode." Robert and Diane joined us in the kitchen, their laughter replaced with concern. Logan opened the folder, his eyes scanning the documents and screenshots. As he read, his face paled and his hand trembled slightly. "What is this?" Diane demanded, snatching the papers from him. Her eyes widened as she saw the text exchanges and the developer's offer. "It's exactly what it looks like," I said. "Logan wasn't planning to let you keep the house. He was going to sell it out from under you for a quick profit." The room fell into silence, the weight of my words sinking in. Logan stammered, trying to explain. "It's not what it looks like. I was just exploring options." "Exploring options?" I interrupted, my voice sharp. "Don't insult me, Logan. You've been scheming from the start. You stole this house from me, dragged your parents into your mess, and now you're trying to sell it behind their backs. How low can you go?" Diane's face twisted in fury. "Is this true, Logan? Were you planning to betray us?" Robert remained quiet, his jaw clenched, but the betrayal was evident in his eyes. Logan stuttered, unable to form a coherent defense. Finally, he lashed out, his anger turning toward me. "This is your fault, Amanda. If you hadn't been so controlling, so insistent on doing everything your way, none of this would have happened. I laughed bitterly. Really? My fault? You mean it's my fault you stole from me, lied to your parents, and ruined everything you touched? Logan, you've always been good at playing the victim, but this is a new low. The argument escalated, voices overlapping in a cacophony of accusations and denials. Diane was on the verge of tears, while Robert quietly seethed. Logan grew more desperate, his excuses growing thinner by the second. Finally, I decided to deliver the final blow. You want to blame me for everything? Fine. But let me make one thing clear, Logan. I'm done playing your games. I filed a lawsuit, and you're going to pay for what you've done. His jaw dropped, and for the first time, I saw genuine fear in his eyes. You can't do that. You don't have the resources. Oh, but I do. I cut him off, and I have more than enough evidence to take you down. As I turned to leave, Diane called after me. Wait, Amanda, what about us? We didn't know. I paused, looking back at her with a mixture of pity and disdain. Maybe you didn't know the full extent of Logan's plans, but you were complicit in his betrayal. You enabled his behavior, Diane. Now you can live with the consequences. With that, I walked out, leaving the house and its occupants in chaos. That night, as I sat in my quiet rental, I felt a strange mix of emotions. The betrayal had cut deeper than I could have imagined, but exposing the truth brought a sense of vindication. Logan and his parents thought they could take everything from me, but they had underestimated my resolve. The battle was far from over, but I was ready to fight. For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of hope. This wasn't just about reclaiming what was mine. It was about proving to myself that I was stronger than the people who tried to break me. The next few days were a whirlwind of preparation. Armed with irrefutable evidence of Logan's deceit and the betrayal of his parents, I worked with my lawyer to finalize the legal documents. Every piece of correspondence, every shady deal, they were all in my possession, forming an airtight case against him. I had spent years letting Logan and his family trample over me, and now I was taking back control. The confrontation came on a stormy evening. Logan had returned from another of his aimless outings, still oblivious to the storm brewing inside the house. As he sat at the dining table, scrolling through his phone, I placed a folder in front of him. "What's this?" he asked, not looking up. "Your eviction notice," I said coldly, the weight of my words cutting through the tension in the room. Logan's head snapped up, confusion turning into anger as he opened the folder. His eyes darted over the pages, his expression shifting from disbelief to panic. "What the hell is this, Amanda?" "It's everything," I replied. "Every lie, every shady deal, every ounce of manipulation you've used to steal from me and deceive everyone around you. It's over, Logan." He slammed the folder shut and rose from his chair, towering over me. "You can't do this. You think you can just kick me out of my own house?" "Our house," I corrected, my voice steady. "The one I built, paid for, and maintained while you did nothing but gamble and lie. And yes, Logan, I can do this. Legally, it's all mine." Logan's parents, overhearing the commotion, entered the room. Diane's face was a mixture of confusion and alarm. "Amanda, what's going on?" "What's going on?" I said, turning to face her. "Is that your son's little scheme to sell the house out from under me and flip it for a profit has come to light. And since you were all complicit, this is your notice too. You have 2 weeks to vacate." Diane gasped, her face paling. "You can't do this to us. We're family." "Family doesn't manipulate and steal," I replied. "You made your choice when you sided with Logan's lies. Now you'll live with the consequences." The room descended into chaos as Logan and his parents shouted over one another, their protests a futile attempt to regain control. But I stood firm, unshaken by their theatrics. For too long, I had let their opinions and schemes dictate my life. This time, I was done. "You have until the end of the month," I said, my voice cutting through their arguments. "And if you think I won't follow through, think again." With that, I turned and left the room, the weight on my shoulders lifting with each step. I had finally broken free, and there was no turning back. The day I saw the last of Logan and his parents leaving the house felt like the first breath of freedom I'd taken in years. The space that had once been filled with tension and manipulation now seemed to exhale with me, as if it too had been holding its breath all this time. I stood on the front porch, watching as they piled into Logan's rusted SUV. Diane threw a final glare my way, and Logan's defeated expression said it all. He knew he'd lost. Without a word, they drove off, leaving me standing in the sunlight of my own life. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of transformation. I threw myself into rebuilding my life, starting with the house. The first thing to go was the heavy, oppressive furniture Diane had insisted on bringing in. Piece by piece, I replaced it with light, modern furnishings that reflected my newfound independence. The act of reshaping my home felt symbolic. With every room I redecorated, I reclaimed a piece of myself that had been buried under years of neglect and control. The house began to feel less like a battleground and more like a sanctuary. Work became another source of joy. My handmade accessories business flourished as word spread about my talent. Orders came flooding in, and I was soon approached by a local boutique interested in carrying my pieces. What had started as a hobby to distract myself from my problems became a thriving career. To my surprise, I found that I loved the independence and sense of purpose that came with running my own business. For years, I had doubted my abilities, letting Logan and his family convince me that I was nothing without them. But here I was, standing on my own 2 feet and thriving. One day, as I worked on a custom order in my newly organized studio, I received an email that made me pause. It was from a local organization that supported women starting over after difficult relationships. They had heard about my story through a mutual connection and wanted me to host a workshop for their members, teaching them how to make their own accessories. I hesitated for a moment, unsure if I was ready to share my story so publicly. But as I thought about the women who might benefit from hearing it, I realized how far I had come. This was an opportunity to not only help others, but to remind myself of my strength. I accepted the invitation. The workshop was a success. The room was filled with women eager to learn, and the atmosphere was electric with hope and determination. As I taught them how to shape metal and thread beads, I shared pieces of my journey. Not the whole story, but enough to show them that it was possible to rebuild after heartbreak. When the workshop ended, one of the attendees approached me, tears in her eyes. "Thank you," she said. "You have no idea how much this means to me." Her words stayed with me long after the workshop ended. For the first time in years, I felt like I had a purpose beyond survival. Months turned into a year, and my life looked nothing like it had before. I was financially stable, emotionally grounded, and surrounded by people who genuinely cared for me. My business continued to grow, and the workshops became a regular part of my schedule. Each one reminded me of the strength we all carry, even when we feel at our weakest. As for Logan, I heard through mutual acquaintances that his life had taken a predictable turn. Unable to manage the financial burden of the house, he and his parents had been forced to move into a small apartment on the outskirts of town. He'd picked up part-time work, but his gambling habits and irresponsibility had left him struggling to make ends meet. I didn't revel in his misfortune, but I couldn't deny the satisfaction of knowing that I had escaped the cycle of chaos he created. One evening, as I sat on my newly decorated porch watching the sunset, I felt a sense of peace that I hadn't experienced in years. The past no longer felt like a weight around my neck, but a stepping stone that had brought me here. I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. My home was mine, my life was mine, and for the first time in a long time, I felt free. The evening was cool, a gentle breeze carrying the scent of freshly planted flowers from the garden I had meticulously nurtured. Sitting on my porch, a cup of tea warming my hands, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here, a life now unburdened by the shadows of Logan and his family. The scars of the past were still there, faint but present, reminders of the strength it took to rebuild. It wasn't long after I had reclaimed my home and my independence that new opportunities began presenting themselves. My handmade accessories business had not only stabilized my finances, but also opened doors I hadn't dared to imagine. Invitations to showcase my work at local art fairs and boutiques poured in, each event another step forward in affirming my self-worth. But the greatest shift was within me. For years, I had lived in survival mode, doing whatever was necessary to keep the peace in my marriage and my home. Now, I lived for myself, driven by passion and purpose. One sunny afternoon, as I was preparing orders for a particularly busy week, an unexpected knock at the door disrupted my focus. Setting down the intricately designed bracelet I had been polishing, I went to answer it, expecting a delivery or a neighbor. Instead, I found Logan standing there, his face gaunt and his posture slouched. His once sharp suit was replaced by a wrinkled shirt, and there was an air of desperation about him. "What do you want, Logan?" I asked, keeping my tone calm but firm. "I just need to talk," he said, his voice lacking the usual bravado. "Things haven't been easy, and I raised a hand to stop him. "Logan, whatever you have to say, it won't change anything. You made your choices, and I've made mine." He looked at me with a mixture of frustration and regret. "I know I screwed up," he admitted, his eyes darting to the ground. I thought, maybe we could start over. The absurdity of his request made me laugh, though not out of humor. "Start over? Logan, you sold our house, lied to me, and tried to take everything I worked for. What makes you think I'd ever let you back into my life?" "I've changed," he insisted. "I've realized how much I took you for granted." I shook my head, stepping out onto the porch to put a physical barrier between us. "Logan, the time for realizing that was long before you destroyed everything. I've built a life for myself, and I'm not going backward." His shoulders sagged, as if my words had finally broken through. Without another word, he turned and walked away. I watched him disappear down the street, a strange sense of closure settling over me. For so long, I had feared this confrontation, but now it felt like nothing more than an echo of a life I had left behind. With Logan's chapter firmly closed, I turned my focus entirely to my future. The business flourished, and my workshops became a sought-after experience in the community. Teaching others not only provided financial stability, but also gave me a sense of fulfillment I hadn't realized I craved. I began working with a local nonprofit that supported women escaping toxic relationships, sharing my story to inspire others. At first, it was nerve-wracking to relive the painful moments of my past, but seeing the impact my words had on others made it worthwhile. One of the women I mentored, Emily, reminded me so much of myself in the early days after leaving Logan. She was timid, unsure of her worth, and burdened by the guilt of walking away from her own unhealthy marriage. Over time, I watched her grow stronger, finding her voice and reclaiming her life. Helping women like Emily became a cornerstone of my new purpose. As the years passed, the memories of my marriage faded into the background, replaced by the joy of new experiences and achievements. I traveled to places I had only dreamed of, found solace in nature, and surrounded myself with people who genuinely cared for me. On the 5th anniversary of my business, I hosted an open house at my studio, inviting clients, friends, and supporters to celebrate the milestone. Standing in the middle of the room, watching laughter and conversation fill the space, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. This was my life now, one I had built with resilience, determination, and a refusal to let my past define me. There were moments when I thought about love, about the possibility of letting someone new into my life. But each time, I reminded myself that I didn't need anyone to complete me. If the right person came along, it would be a partnership built on mutual respect and equality, not control and resentment. For now, I was content. My days were filled with creativity, connection, and peace, a stark contrast to the chaos that had once consumed me. One evening, as I sat by the fireplace in my now cozy living room, flipping through an old photo album, I came across a picture of the house from its early days. It was taken right after we'd finished rebuilding, and I was smiling, full of hope for what the future would hold. The woman in the photo didn't know the hardships that lay ahead, but she also didn't know how strong she would become. I closed the album and placed it on the shelf, a smile playing on my lips. The house, once a symbol of broken dreams, had become a testament to my resilience and the life I had created. As I turned out the lights and headed to bed, I felt a deep sense of peace. The shadows of the past no longer loomed over me. I was free, thriving, and ready for whatever the future might hold.